The millionaire was cold and unreachable until the new nanny said, "Your son needs his father." She knew this interview would be different the moment she stepped into the marble foyer. Eleanor Scott adjusted the strap of her worn leather purse and glanced around the sprawling Manhattan penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Central Park, while expensive artwork lined the pristine white walls. Everything screamed wealth and perfection. Everything except the small red sneaker abandoned near the elevator. A child lived here. A child who left his shoes wherever he pleased. "Ms. Scott?" A sharp voice cut through her observations. Eleanor turned to find a stern-faced woman in her 50s dressed in an immaculate gray suit. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her features. "I'm Mrs. Caldwell, the house manager. Mr. Hale is waiting in his office." The woman's tone suggested this was already an inconvenience. "I should warn you, the last 3 candidates didn't make it past the first question." Eleanor nodded, following Mrs. Caldwell down a hallway lined with closed doors. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the soft click of heels against polished hardwood. No laughter, no children's voices, no life. They stopped before a heavy oak door. Mrs. Caldwell knocked twice, then pushed it open without waiting for a response. "Sir, the final candidate is here." The office was a monument to success. Awards covered one wall, while another showcased patents and medical breakthroughs. Behind an imposing desk sat a man who looked like he'd been carved from stone. Tristan Hale didn't look up from his computer screen. At 38, he possessed the kind of sharp, angular features that graced magazine covers, if magazines featured men who seemed incapable of smiling. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit expensive and wrinkle-free. Everything about him screamed control and distance. "Sit," he said without lifting his eyes. Eleanor remained standing. The silence stretched for a full minute before Tristan finally looked up. His gray eyes were the color of winter storms, beautiful and utterly cold. They swept over her with clinical detachment, taking in her simple black dress, her practical flats, her makeup-free face. "You're late," he said. "I'm actually 3 minutes early." Eleanor's voice was calm, steady. "I waited in the lobby because I believe punctuality means arriving exactly on time, not whenever it's convenient." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or annoyance. Mrs. Caldwell shifted uncomfortably behind Eleanor. The previous candidates couldn't handle Oliver. Tristan leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving Eleanor's face. They said he was difficult, unresponsive. Some suggested therapy might be more appropriate than childcare. Eleanor felt a spark of anger but kept her expression neutral. "Children aren't difficult, Mr. Hale. They're just trying to communicate in the only way they know how. And how would you handle a 4-year-old who refuses to speak to strangers? Who runs away when approached? Who hasn't shown affection to anyone in—" He stopped abruptly, his jaw tightening. "I'd listen," Eleanor said simply. "Listen to what?" "He barely speaks. Sometimes the most important conversations happen without words." Tristan studied her for a long moment. "You have experience with traumatized children?" The question hit closer to home than he could know. Eleanor thought of her younger brother David, barely 16 and fighting a battle no teenager should face. Of the night she'd sat by his hospital bed, holding his hand while machines beeped softly in the darkness. "I have experience with people who are hurting," she said. Before Tristan could respond, a small sound came from the doorway. Eleanor turned to see a little boy peeking around the frame, his dark hair falling across serious gray eyes. Eyes that were unmistakably his father's, yet somehow softer. He wore dinosaur pajamas despite it being 3 in the afternoon, and his small fingers clutched a worn stuffed elephant. This was Oliver. The boy took one look at the adults and started to retreat. But Eleanor did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She sat down on the floor, cross-legged, making herself smaller, less threatening. "I like your elephant," she said quietly, not looking directly at Oliver but speaking into the space between them. "What's his name?" Oliver froze at the doorway. His eyes darted to his father, who had gone completely still, then back to Eleanor. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic far below. Then, in a whisper so soft it was almost lost, "Mr. Peanuts." Eleanor smiled. Not the bright, overwhelming smile adults often forced on children, but something gentle and genuine. "Mr. Peanuts is a very good name. I bet he's an excellent listener." Oliver nodded solemnly, taking a tiny step into the room. "Oliver." Tristan's voice was sharp with surprise and something else, something that might have been hope. "Come here." But the spell was broken. Oliver's eyes went wide, and he disappeared back into the hallway, his small footsteps pattering away. The silence that followed was deafening. Tristan's face had returned to its mask of cold control, but Eleanor caught the flash of pain that crossed his features before he could hide it. In that moment, she saw past the expensive suit and intimidating reputation to the man underneath, a father who had no idea how to reach his own son. "When can you start?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Eleanor stood, brushing imaginary dust from her dress. "I haven't said I wanted the job, Mr. Hale." His eyebrows rose slightly. "You're turning down the position?" "I'm saying that taking care of your son isn't just about childcare. It's about creating a home where he feels safe to be himself, where he doesn't have to earn love or worry about being too much trouble." She paused, meeting his gaze directly. "The question isn't whether I want the job. The question is whether you're ready to do the work." For the first time since she'd entered the room, Tristan Hale looked genuinely unsettled. Mrs. Caldwell cleared her throat. "Shall I show Ms. Scott out, sir?" Tristan was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming silently against his desk. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the pristine office. "No," he said finally. "Show her to the guest room. She starts tomorrow." As Eleanor followed Mrs. Caldwell from the office, she heard Tristan's voice behind her, so quiet she almost missed it. "And Mrs. Caldwell, cancel my dinner meeting. I'll be home tonight." The door clicked shut, and Eleanor found herself wondering what she had just walked into, and whether she was brave enough to see it through. After all, some broken things weren't meant to be fixed quickly, but that didn't mean they couldn't be healed. Eleanor woke to the sound of absolute silence, and that's when she knew something was wrong. The guest room was bathed in pale morning light, its cream-colored walls and expensive linens creating an atmosphere of sterile perfection. She checked her phone. 7:15 a.m. In her experience, 4-year-olds weren't naturally quiet at this hour. They were engines of energy, demanding breakfast and attention with the subtlety of fire alarms. But not Oliver. She dressed quickly in dark jeans and a soft lavender sweater, professional but approachable, and made her way to the kitchen. The penthouse felt different in daylight, less imposing but somehow more empty. Her footsteps echoed despite her efforts to move quietly. The kitchen was a masterpiece of modern design. Marble countertops, stainless steel appliances, and not a single sign that a child lived here. No colorful plates, no cartoon cups, no evidence of the beautiful chaos that usually followed 4-year-olds. Mrs. Caldwell stood at the coffee machine, her gray hair already perfectly styled despite the early hour. She glanced up as Eleanor entered, her expression neutral but watchful. "Good morning, Ms. Scott. Coffee? Please. Where's Oliver?" "Still sleeping. The boy tends to stay in his room until quite late." Mrs. Caldwell handed Eleanor a pristine white mug. "Mr. Hale left for the office an hour ago. He said to tell you that Oliver's schedule is posted on the refrigerator." Eleanor examined the laminated sheet stuck to the pristine refrigerator with clinical precision. Every minute was accounted for. Breakfast at 8:00, educational activities from 9:00 to 11:00, lunch at 12:00, quiet time until 2:00, outdoor time from 2:00 to 3:00, snack at 3:30, more structured activities until 5:00, dinner at 6:00, bath at 7:00, bedtime at 8:00. It read like a hospital chart. "Who made this schedule?" Eleanor asked. "Mr. Hale, of course. He believes structure is important for Oliver's development." Eleanor studied the rigid timetable. No room for spontaneity, for following a child's natural curiosity, for the organic flow of a normal day. Every moment controlled and predetermined. What happens if Oliver doesn't want to eat at exactly 8 o'clock? Mrs. Caldwell's expression tightened slightly. Oliver eats when he's supposed to eat. Mr. Hale doesn't tolerate disruptions to the routine. Eleanor set down her coffee cup, the ceramic making a soft clink against the marble. "And what does Oliver tolerate?" Before Mrs. Caldwell could answer, a small sound came from the hallway, bare feet padding softly against hardwood. Eleanor turned to see Oliver standing in the kitchen doorway, still in his dinosaur pajamas, hair sticking up in defiant tufts. Mr. Peanuts dangled from one small hand. He looked uncertain, almost surprised to find adults in his kitchen. "Good morning, Oliver," Eleanor said gently, not moving toward him. "Did you sleep well?" The boy nodded once, his gray eyes, so like his father's but infinitely more vulnerable, fixed on her face. He seemed to be weighing something in his young mind. Mrs. Caldwell immediately sprang into action. "Oliver, you're 7 minutes late for breakfast. Come sit down. I've prepared your usual oatmeal." But Oliver didn't move. He continued to study Eleanor with that serious, measuring gaze. Eleanor ignored the schedule entirely. "Are you hungry, sweetheart?" Another small nod. "What sounds good to you this morning?" "Oliver eats oatmeal," Mrs. Caldwell interjected firmly. "It's on his schedule." "I'm asking Oliver what he wants," Eleanor said, her voice still gentle but with an edge of steel that made Mrs. Caldwell step back. Oliver's eyes widened slightly. When was the last time anyone had asked him what he wanted? "Pancakes?" he whispered, the word barely audible. Eleanor smiled. "Pancakes sound perfect. Do you like them with blueberries or chocolate chips?" "Blueberries," Oliver said, a little louder this time, taking a tentative step into the kitchen. Mrs. Caldwell looked scandalized. "Miss Scott, I don't think— Could you show me where the pancake mix is?" Eleanor asked pleasantly, but her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. 20 minutes later, Oliver sat at the kitchen island swinging his legs and watching Eleanor flip pancakes at the stove. He hadn't said much more, but he'd answered her questions with small nods and shy whispers. More importantly, he'd stayed in the kitchen instead of retreating to his room. "My brother David loves pancakes too," Eleanor said conversationally, sliding a golden pancake onto Oliver's plate. "He always tries to catch the blueberries with his fork before eating the rest." Oliver's eyes lit up with interest. He carefully speared a blueberry and popped it into his mouth, a tiny smile ghosting across his features. "Is David big?" Oliver asked, his voice still quiet, but more confident than before. "He's 16, much bigger than you, but not nearly as brave." "I'm not brave," Oliver said matter-of-factly, cutting his pancake into precise squares. Eleanor sat down across from him with her own plate. "You got up this morning and came to find us. That took courage." Oliver considered this, chewing thoughtfully. "Daddy says brave people don't get scared." Eleanor felt something twist in her chest. "Your daddy is very smart about business things, but I think he might be wrong about that. The bravest people I know get scared all the time. They just do the right thing anyway. Like when Mr. Peanuts is scared of thunder but he still protects me? Exactly like that." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Eleanor watched as Oliver carefully finished every bite, even using his napkin without being reminded. He was a thoughtful child, precise in his movements, old beyond his years. "Miss Scott?" His voice was so quiet she had to lean forward to hear him. "What is it, sweetheart? Are you going to leave like the others?" The question hit Eleanor like a physical blow. How many women had walked through this child's life only to disappear when he failed to meet their expectations or his father's rigid standards? She reached across the table and gently touched his small hand. "I'm not going anywhere, Oliver. Not unless you want me to." He looked down at their joined hands, his expression serious. "What if I'm not good?" "Oh, honey." Eleanor's voice was thick with emotion. "You're already perfect exactly as you are." For the first time since she'd arrived, Oliver looked directly into her eyes and held her gaze. In that moment, Eleanor saw past his careful reserve to the lonely little boy underneath, a child who'd learned to tiptoe through his own life, afraid of being too much trouble. The kitchen door swung open and Mrs. Caldwell reappeared, clearly agitated. "Miss Scott, Mr. Hale is on line 1. He's asking about Oliver's breakfast schedule." Eleanor squeezed Oliver's hand once more before releasing it. "Tell Mr. Hale that Oliver ate a healthy breakfast and that we're about to start our morning activity. But the schedule will be adjusted to fit Oliver's needs, not the other way around." Eleanor stood, clearing their plates. "Isn't that right, Oliver?" Oliver nodded solemnly, but Eleanor caught the spark of something new in his eyes. Hope. The call came at exactly 11:47 a.m., interrupting what Eleanor had quietly decided was the most important conversation of the day. She and Oliver were sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by his extensive collection of toy dinosaurs. For the past hour, he'd been telling her elaborate stories about each one, their names, their favorite foods, their secret fears. His voice was still soft, but it carried an animation she hadn't seen before. "And this one is Reginald," Oliver said, holding up a small triceratops. "He's scared of the dark, but he pretends he's not, because he doesn't want the other dinosaurs to worry." Eleanor's heart clenched at the obvious parallel. That sounds like a heavy responsibility for Reginald. "Sometimes grown-ups have to pretend too," Oliver said matter-of-factly, arranging Reginald next to a fierce-looking T-Rex. "So kids don't get sad." Before Eleanor could respond to this devastating observation, the sharp ring of the house phone cut through their quiet world. Mrs. Caldwell appeared instantly, as if she'd been hovering just out of sight. "Miss Scott, Mr. Hale is calling." Eleanor glanced at Oliver, who had immediately gone still. his small hands frozen over his dinosaurs. The change in him was instant and heartbreaking, from animated child to watchful statue in seconds. "Tell him I'll call him back," Eleanor said. Mrs. Caldwell's eyebrows shot up. "He specifically asked to speak with you now. He's between meetings. Then he can wait until after this meeting," Eleanor replied calmly, turning back to Oliver. "Now tell me more about this T-Rex. What's his story?" The phone continued ringing. Mrs. Caldwell stood there, clearly torn between following Eleanor's instructions and defying her employer. Finally, she answered with obvious reluctance. "Mr. Hale, I'm sorry, but Ms. Scott is currently engaged with Oliver and asked to call you back." A pause. "Yes, sir. I'll let her know it's urgent." Eleanor could hear Tristan's voice through the receiver, sharp and clearly displeased, though she couldn't make out the words. Mrs. Caldwell hung up looking pale. "He said to tell you that educational time should have started 20 minutes ago, and that dinosaurs are not on the approved activity list." Oliver's face fell. He began carefully putting his dinosaurs back in their box, his movements mechanical and resigned. "Oliver, wait," Eleanor said gently. "What do you think dinosaurs can teach us?" The boy paused. A small brontosaurus clutched in his hand. That big things can be gentle?" "That's right. And what else? That some of them traveled in families to stay safe?" "Exactly. Sounds pretty educational to me." Eleanor smiled at him. "Mrs. Caldwell, please tell Mr. Hale that we're conducting a comprehensive study of prehistoric life, focusing on social structures, adaptive behaviors, and protective instincts. Very educational." Mrs. Caldwell looked like she might faint. "Ms. Scott, I don't think—" "Also tell him that Oliver has been speaking more in the past 2 hours than he apparently has in weeks. I'd say our educational approach is working perfectly." Oliver stared at Eleanor with something approaching awe. When was the last time an adult had defended his choices? When had anyone stood up to his father on his behalf? The phone rang again. This time, Eleanor answered it herself. "Good morning, Mr. Hale. What exactly do you think you're doing?" Tristan's voice was cold enough to frost the windows. "I left specific instructions about Oliver's schedule. Educational activities were supposed to begin at 9. And they did. Oliver has been learning about paleontology, storytelling, emotional intelligence, and creative expression. Very comprehensive curriculum. By playing with toys. By engaging with materials that interest him and encourage verbal communication." Eleanor kept her voice professional but firm. "Isn't that what you hired me for? To connect with your son?" A long pause. In the background, she could hear the muffled sounds of his office. Phones ringing, muted conversations. The previous nannies said structure was essential for his development. The previous nannies failed. Eleanor said quietly, "Maybe it's time to try a different approach." Another pause. Longer this time. "I want a full report of his activities when I get home tonight." "Of course. What time should I expect you?" "I usually arrive around 8:30. Eleanor glanced at Oliver, who was listening to every word with that serious adult expression that broke her heart. "Oliver's bedtime is at 8, she said. "According to your schedule." "Yes, and? And when was the last time you said goodnight to your son?" The silence stretched so long Eleanor wondered if the call had dropped. When Tristan finally spoke, his voice was different, quieter, more uncertain. That's not— Oliver is usually asleep by the time I return. Maybe tonight could be different." Eleanor could practically hear him thinking, the weight of her words settling into whatever carefully constructed justification he'd built around his absence. "I'll try to be home by 7:30, he said finally. "Oliver would like that." After she hung up, Oliver approached her cautiously. "Is Daddy mad?" Eleanor knelt down to his level. "Your daddy works very hard, and sometimes when people work too hard they forget how to play. But that doesn't mean he doesn't love you. He used to play with me," Oliver said so quietly Eleanor had to strain to hear him. "Before Mommy went to heaven. We built castles and read stories and he did funny voices." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. What kinds of funny voices? Dragon voices. And princess voices. And once he pretended to be a very silly elephant who forgot how to trumpet. For the first time Oliver giggled, a small rusty sound as if he'd forgotten how. "That sounds wonderful. Maybe we could remind him how fun it is to make silly voices." Oliver's expression grew hopeful, then worried. What if he doesn't remember how? Eleanor pulled him into a gentle hug, feeling his small body relax against hers. "Then we'll teach him. Sometimes grown-ups need help remembering how to be happy." As they spent the afternoon together, reading stories, building elaborate dinosaur habitats, and sharing a lunch of grilled cheese cut into fun shapes. Eleanor watched Oliver slowly unfold like a flower reaching towards sunlight. He asked questions, made jokes, even attempted a very serious elephant trumpet that sent them both into fits of laughter. By evening, Eleanor had compiled a mental report that had nothing to do with educational benchmarks and everything to do with the miracle of watching a child remember how to be a child. At 7:20, she heard the private elevator ascending. Oliver had been watching the clock for the past hour, growing more anxious as 7:30 approached. Now he stood frozen in the living room, clutching Mr. Peanuts, his earlier joy replaced by nervous anticipation. "Remember," Eleanor whispered, "you don't have to perform for anyone. Just be yourself." The elevator doors opened, and Tristan Hale stepped into his home 24 minutes earlier than usual, carrying a briefcase and wearing the same expression of controlled distance Eleanor remembered from their interview. But when he saw Oliver standing there waiting for him, something flickered across his features. "Hello, Oliver." "Hi, Daddy." Oliver's voice was barely audible. Father and son stood looking at each other across an expanse of marble floor that might as well have been an ocean. Neither seemed to know how to bridge the gap, until Eleanor did something that would change everything. She stepped aside and let them figure it out themselves. The silence stretched for 15 heartbeats. Eleanor counted each one as she watched father and son stand frozen across from each other. Tristan looked impossibly tall in his expensive charcoal suit, briefcase in hand like armor against intimacy. Oliver seemed even smaller by comparison, his dinosaur pajamas a stark contrast to his father's corporate perfection. Between them lay 2 years of careful distance, broken routines, and words that had never been spoken. Then Oliver did something that surprised everyone. He walked forward, not running, not hesitating, just a small determined walk across the marble expanse until he stood directly in front of his father. He tilted his head back to look up at Tristan's face, Mr. Peanuts dangling from his small fist. "I built a dinosaur city today," Oliver said, his voice soft but clear. "With volcanoes and everything." Eleanor said it was engineering. Tristan blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Engineering?" "Yeah, because I had to figure out how to make the bridge strong enough for the heavy dinosaurs but not too heavy for the flying ones to land on." Oliver's words came faster now, animated by the memory. "And I used blocks and books and even some of your old magazines from the coffee table." "You used my magazines?" There was no anger in Tristan's voice, just genuine surprise. "Eleanor said we could borrow them if we were careful. We didn't hurt them, promise. Just made ramps for the Triceratops family." Eleanor watched as something shifted in Tristan's expression, a hairline crack in his carefully maintained composure. He set down his briefcase, and after a moment's hesitation, knelt down to Oliver's level. "Show me," he said quietly. Oliver's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really?" "Really." The next 20 minutes transformed the sterile living room into something Eleanor had never seen. A father and son, sitting cross-legged on the floor, building prehistoric civilizations with whatever materials they could find. Tristan loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves as Oliver explained the complex social dynamics of his dinosaur families. "This one is Reginald," Oliver said, holding up the small Triceratops. "He's scared of the dark, but pretends he's brave." Tristan took the dinosaur gently, examining it with the same attention he probably gave million-dollar contracts. "That must be difficult for him." "Eleanor says the bravest people get scared but do things anyway." Tristan's eyes flicked to Eleanor, who was trying to make herself invisible in the kitchen doorway. "Eleanor said that?" "Uh-huh. Like when Mr. Peanuts gets scared of thunder but he still protects me." Oliver paused, studying his father's face with that serious expression that seemed far too old for four. "Are you scared sometimes, Daddy?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Eleanor held her breath, watching as Tristan struggled with an honesty he probably hadn't accessed in years. "Yes," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I get scared sometimes." "Of what?" Tristan was quiet for so long Eleanor thought he might not answer. When he spoke, his words were careful, measured. "Of not being good enough, of making mistakes that hurt people I care about." Oliver nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. "Maybe Mr. Peanuts could protect you too. He's very good at his job." And then, to Eleanor's amazement, Tristan smiled. Not the polite, corporate smile she'd seen in his business photos, but something real and unguarded, the smile of a father remembering what it felt like to see the world through his child's eyes. "I would be honored to have Mr. Peanut's protection," Tristan said, accepting the stuffed elephant Oliver solemnly handed him. They played until well past 8 o'clock, past bedtime, past dinner, past every carefully scheduled moment on the refrigerator chart. Eleanor eventually brought them sandwiches, which they ate sitting on the floor, surrounded by their elaborate dinosaur civilization. It wasn't until Oliver yawned widely, leaning against his father's shoulder, that reality crept back in. "Someone needs a bath," Tristan said softly, smoothing Oliver's hair. "Will you read to me?" Oliver asked, his voice sleepy but hopeful. Like before, Eleanor saw the pain flash across Tristan's features, guilt and regret and 2 years of missed bedtime stories. I'm not sure I remember how to do the voices." "That's okay," Oliver said, taking his father's hand. "We can practice together." As they headed toward Oliver's room, Eleanor began cleaning up the living room, carefully packing away dinosaurs and stacking magazines. She could hear water running, then Tristan's voice from down the hall, tentative at first, then growing stronger as he attempted what sounded like a very rusty dragon voice. Oliver's giggle drifted through the penthouse like music. 20 minutes later, Tristan appeared in the kitchen doorway. His hair was slightly damp, his shirt wrinkled, and his tie hung loose around his neck. He looked more human than Eleanor had ever seen him. "He's asleep," Tristan said quietly. He asked me to leave his door open. Said he doesn't like it completely dark." Eleanor paused in loading the dishwasher. "How long has his door been closed at night?" "Since," Tristan stopped, running a hand through his hair. "Since the funeral, Mrs. Caldwell said children sleep better with routine and structure." "Children sleep better when they feel safe," Eleanor said gently. "Darkness can be scary when you're already afraid of being alone." Tristan leaned against the doorframe, suddenly looking exhausted. "I've been doing everything wrong, haven't I?" The question was so quietly vulnerable that Eleanor felt her heart break a little. "You've been surviving. There's a difference. Tristan struggled for words. "He's so much like Catherine. The way he explains things, his expressions. Sometimes I look at him and I can barely breathe, and sometimes avoiding that pain means avoiding him." Yes, the admission came out like a confession. "I told myself I was giving him space to heal, that he needed professionals, structure, routine, but really I couldn't handle seeing her in his eyes every day." Eleanor turned to face him fully. "What do you see when you look at him now?" Tristan was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands. "My son," he said finally. "I see my son, and I see that I've wasted 2 years being afraid of my own grief instead of helping him with his. It's not wasted if you learn from it. How do I fix this? How do I make up for 2 years of not being present?" Eleanor moved closer, her voice gentle but firm. "You show up, tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day after. You don't try to be perfect. You just try to be present. Children don't need perfect parents, Tristan. They need real ones." Something in his expression shifted when she used his first name instead of the formal Mr. Hale, a barrier crumbling, perhaps, or permission to be human instead of untouchable. "Will you help me?" he asked, and the question carried the weight of someone who'd forgotten how to ask for help. "I don't know how to do this anymore. I don't know how to be his father." "You were his father tonight," Eleanor said softly, "building dinosaur cities and making dragon voices and letting him fall asleep against your shoulder. You already know how. You just forgot for a while." Tristan nodded, blinking hard. "Thank you. For today. For giving him back his voice. I didn't give him anything. I just listened when he was ready to use it." As Eleanor gathered her things to return to the guest room, Tristan called her name softly. "Eleanor?" She turned back. "Tomorrow. Would you mind if I came home earlier? Maybe around 6? Eleanor smiled. Oliver would love that. But more importantly, so would you. As she walked down the hallway, Eleanor could hear Tristan moving quietly toward Oliver's room, checking on his sleeping son. Some walls, she realized, weren't meant to be torn down quickly. They needed to crumble slowly, brick by careful bee. 3 weeks later, Eleanor discovered that miracles often came disguised as ordinary Tuesday afternoons. She was sitting at the kitchen island helping Oliver with a puzzle of the solar system when she heard something that made her freeze mid-sentence. Laughter, bright, unrestrained, and coming from the direction of the private elevator. Oliver's head snapped up, his eyes wide with the same surprise Eleanor felt. "Is that Daddy?" The elevator doors opened, and Tristan appeared, still chuckling at something on his phone. His tie was already loosened, his jacket slung over one arm. It was only 5:30, the earliest he'd been home since Eleanor started working there. "Hey, kiddo," he called out, his voice carrying a warmth that would have been unimaginable a month ago. "How was your day?" "Daddy?" Oliver scrambled down from his stool and ran to his father. Actually ran without hesitation or that careful measuring of moods that had once preceded every interaction. Eleanor watched as Tristan scooped Oliver up effortlessly, spinning him once before settling him on his hip. The transformation in both of them still caught her off guard sometimes. Oliver chattered excitedly about their day, the butterfly they'd seen in Central Park, the story Eleanor had read him, the fact that he'd eaten all his vegetables at lunch without being asked. "And look," Oliver pointed to the puzzle spread across the kitchen island. "I found Jupiter all by myself. Eleanor says it has a storm that's been going on for hundreds of years." "The Great Red Spot," Tristan said, carrying Oliver back to the puzzle. "It's actually bigger than Earth." "Really? How do you know that?" "I studied astronomy in college. Want me to tell you about Saturn's rings?" Eleanor slipped quietly away as father and son bent over the puzzle together. Tristan's voice animated as he explained planetary orbits and gravitational pulls in terms a 4-year-old could understand. These moments had become precious to her, watching Tristan rediscover the joy of being Oliver's first teacher, seeing Oliver's confidence bloom under his father's undivided attention. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother David. "Chemo went well today. Feeling optimistic. How's the job?" Eleanor smiled, typing back, "Life-changing. For all of us." It was true. Working for the Hales had become more than just a job. It had become a lesson in the healing power of presence, of showing up even when it felt impossible. "Eleanor," Oliver's voice called from the kitchen. "Come see what Daddy showed me." She returned to find them huddled over Tristan's laptop, a NASA website displaying images of Jupiter's swirling storms. Oliver was practically vibrating with excitement. "Did you know Jupiter protects Earth from asteroids?" Oliver announced importantly. "It's like a big brother planet." "That's incredible," Eleanor said, catching Tristan's eye over Oliver's head. The pride in his expression was unmistakable, not just pride in his son's curiosity, but in his own ability to nurture it. "We were thinking," Tristan said, his tone carefully casual, "maybe this weekend we could visit the planetarium, if you'd like to join us." Eleanor felt something flutter in her chest. Dangerous territory. The line between employee and family had been blurring for weeks now, and moments like this made it even harder to maintain professional distance. "I'd love to," she said, then quickly added, "Oliver would really enjoy that." "We both would," Tristan said quietly, and something in his voice made Eleanor look away. Over dinner, which Tristan now ate with them every night, Oliver entertained them with elaborate stories about his dinosaur friends and their space adventures. He'd started creating these fantastical tales recently, his imagination flowering under the safety of their attention. "And then Reginald flew his spaceship to Jupiter to help with the big storm," Oliver said, gesturing dramatically with his fork. "Because even though he's scared of the dark, space isn't really dark. It's full of stars." "That's very wise of Reginald," Eleanor said. "Eleanor says everyone needs help sometimes, even brave space dinosaurs." Tristan glanced at Eleanor. "Eleanor says a lot of smart things." There it was again. That tone, that look that suggested their relationship had shifted into something neither of them had planned for. Eleanor focused on cutting Oliver's chicken, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened. After dinner, Tristan announced it was bath time, something that had become his responsibility, a ritual he seemed to treasure. As they headed upstairs, Oliver turned back to Eleanor. "Will you read with us tonight?" It had become their routine. Tristan would handle bath time while Eleanor tidied up. Then they'd all pile onto Oliver's bed for stories. These were Eleanor's favorite moments, sitting beside Tristan in the dim lamplight while Oliver nestled between them, his small voice joining in on familiar parts of beloved books. Tonight, Oliver chose a story about a lost whale finding his family. As Tristan read in his improving character voices, Eleanor noticed Oliver's eyelids growing heavy. The boy was fighting sleep, reluctant to let go of these perfect moments. "I don't want today to be over," Oliver mumbled against his father's shoulder. "Tomorrow will be good too," Tristan promised softly. "And the day after that." "Will Eleanor still be here tomorrow?" "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart," Eleanor assured him, smoothing his hair. "Promise?" The word hung in the air, weighted with a 4-year-old's fear of abandonment and the memory of too many people who'd disappeared from his life. "I promise," Eleanor said, meaning it more than any promise she'd ever made. Oliver smiled sleepily. "Good, 'cause we're a family now." The innocent words hit both adults like a thunderbolt. Eleanor felt her breath catch while Tristan's hand stilled on the book's pages. They looked at each other over Oliver's head, a moment of recognition passing between them, of how completely their lives had become intertwined, of how natural this felt despite how complicated it was. "Yes," Tristan said quietly, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. "We are." After Oliver fell asleep, they found themselves in the kitchen, ostensibly cleaning up, but really just reluctant to end the day. Eleanor washed dishes while Tristan put away toys, their movements synchronized from weeks of shared routine. "He's different," Tristan said suddenly. "Oliver, he's himself again, the boy he was before he lost his mother," Eleanor finished gently. "I thought that version of him was gone forever. I thought grief had changed him permanently." Eleanor dried her hands, turning to face him. "Grief did change him. It changed both of you. But that doesn't mean the joy was gone. It was just buried under too much sadness and silence." Tristan leaned against the counter, studying her face. "How did you know? How did you know exactly what he needed?" "Because I know what it feels like to be scared and trying to be brave for everyone else," Eleanor said honestly. "I know what it's like to have people give up on you because you're not healing fast enough or in the right way. Your brother," Eleanor nodded. "When David was first diagnosed, everyone had opinions about how he should handle it. Be positive, fight harder, smile more. No one wanted to just sit with him in the hard moments. And that's what you did for Oliver. Sat with him. I sat with both of you." The silence that followed was charged with unspoken truths. They were standing closer now, close enough that Eleanor could see the flecks of silver in Tristan's gray eyes, close enough to notice that he was looking at her mouth. "Eleanor," he said softly. The kitchen timer chose that moment to beep. Eleanor had set it to remind herself to call David. The sound broke the spell, sending them stepping apart like teenagers caught by parents. "I should?" Eleanor gestured vaguely toward her phone. "Of course. Family first." But as she headed to her room to call her brother, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that the definition of family was becoming more complicated by the day. And for the first time in years, complicated felt like exactly where she wanted to be. Rick, until love could finally find its way through. Eleanor knew she was in trouble the moment she woke up thinking about Tristan's smile. Not his polite corporate smile, or even the gentle one he reserved for Oliver. The private smile he'd given her last night in the kitchen, the one that made her forget she was supposed to be his employee, not the woman sharing quiet moments with him after their son fell asleep. Their son. She caught herself thinking it again, and pressed her palms against her eyes. This was exactly the kind of thinking that could destroy everything she'd helped build. The sound of muffled voices from the kitchen drew her from her spiraling thoughts. She dressed quickly and padded down the hallway, pausing when she heard an unfamiliar voice, crisp, professional, and distinctly disapproving. "Completely inappropriate, Tristan. The board is already questioning your judgment after the Meridian deal. You can't afford another scandal." Eleanor froze. Through the partially open kitchen door, she could see a woman in an expensive navy suit, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a severe chignon. She held herself with the kind of authority that came from years of commanding boardrooms. "There's no scandal, Victoria." Tristan's voice was tight with barely contained irritation. "Eleanor is Oliver's nanny. Nothing more." Eleanor's heart sank even as she told herself this was exactly what she should want to hear. "Please, I've seen the way you look at her. The way she looks at you, Mrs. Caldwell told me you've been coming home early, eating dinner with them every night, playing house like some suburban fantasy. Mrs. Caldwell needs to remember her place. As do you." Victoria's voice sharpened. "You're worth $3 billion, Tristan. You don't date the help." Eleanor felt the words hit her like a physical slap. The help. Is that really how she looked to the outside world? To people in Tristan's circle? Don't. Tristan's voice was dangerous now. Don't reduce Eleanor to some cliché. She's the reason Oliver is speaking again. She's the reason he's happy. And what happens when this little infatuation runs its course? When you get bored with playing daddy and go back to your real life? That boy will lose another mother figure and you'll be right back where you started. Eleanor closed her eyes, hating how much sense Victoria's words made. How many wealthy men had brief relationships with their employees? How many children got caught in the crossfire when those relationships inevitably ended? Daddy? Oliver's small voice made Eleanor's eyes snap open. The boy stood in his bedroom doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes, clearly having been awakened by the raised voices. The conversation in the kitchen stopped abruptly. "Hey, buddy." Tristan's voice was immediately gentler. Come here. Eleanor watched Oliver pad toward the kitchen, then decided she couldn't hide any longer. She entered to find Oliver climbing into Tristan's lap, while Victoria observed the scene with cold calculation. Oliver, this is Victoria Ashworth. She works with Daddy. Victoria's smile was perfectly polished and completely artificial. Hello, Oliver. You're quite the handsome young man. Oliver pressed closer to his father, studying Victoria with the solemn intensity he reserved for strangers. Are you here for breakfast? Oh no, sweetheart, I was just leaving. Victoria's gaze flicked to Eleanor, taking in her simple jeans and sweater with obvious disdain. I'm sure your nanny has everything well in hand. The emphasis on nanny made Eleanor's cheeks burn. Eleanor makes the best pancakes, Oliver announced loyally, with blueberries and everything. How wonderful. Victoria gathered her designer purse, her message clearly delivered. Tristan, think about what I said. Some risks aren't worth taking. After she left, the kitchen felt heavy with unspoken tension. Oliver seemed to sense it, his usual morning chatter replaced by watchful silence. Who wants pancakes? Eleanor asked brightly, desperate to restore normalcy. With extra blueberries? Oliver perked up slightly. With extra everything. As Eleanor busied herself with breakfast preparations, she was acutely aware of Tristan watching her. When Oliver ran to get dressed, Tristan finally spoke. Eleanor, she's right, you know. Eleanor kept her back to him, focusing on measuring flour. About the risks. Victoria doesn't know what she's talking about, doesn't she? Eleanor turned to face him, her professional mask firmly in place. I'm Oliver's nanny, Mr. Hale. That's what you hired me for, and that's what I should focus on. Something flickered across his features. Hurt, perhaps, or recognition of the distance she was deliberately creating. Is that what you want? Professional boundaries? Eleanor's heart screamed no, but her head, the rational part that remembered her brother's medical bills and her own precarious position, nodded. I think it's what's best. For everyone. The day passed in carefully maintained politeness. Eleanor threw herself into activities with Oliver, while Tristan retreated to his home office for calls. By evening, the easy intimacy of recent weeks had been replaced by the kind of formal courtesy that felt like glass, transparent but sharp enough to cut. Dinner was particularly painful. Oliver seemed confused by the sudden shift, looking between the adults with growing worry. Did I do something wrong? He asked finally, his small voice breaking the strained silence. Of course not, sweetheart, Eleanor assured him quickly. Then why is everyone sad? Eleanor and Tristan exchanged a glance across the table, the first real eye contact they'd had all day. Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult decisions, Tristan said carefully. But none of this is your fault, Oliver. You haven't done anything wrong. Is Eleanor leaving? The question hung in the air like a sword. Eleanor saw the fear creep back into Oliver's eyes, the same wariness he'd carried when she first arrived. No, she said firmly. I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Eleanor looked at Tristan, seeing her own conflict reflected in his face. Victoria's words echoed in her mind. What happens when this little infatuation runs its course? But then she looked at Oliver, sweet, sensitive Oliver who'd already lost too much, and made the only choice she could live with. I promise. Later that night, after Oliver was asleep, Eleanor found herself standing on the penthouse balcony, needing air and space to think. The city stretched out below her, millions of lights representing millions of lives, most of them simpler than the tangled mess she'd created for herself. Can't sleep? Tristan's voice startled her. She hadn't heard him approach. Just thinking. He joined her at the railing, careful to maintain distance between them. About what Victoria said, about a lot of things. They stood in silence for a moment, the night air cool against their skin. She's not wrong about the complications, Tristan said quietly. My world. It's not kind to people who don't fit the expected mold. And I definitely don't fit. No. He turned to look at her. You're real. You're genuine. You care more about Oliver's happiness than my bank balance. In my world, that makes you dangerous. Eleanor felt her resolve wavering. Tristan, I know what you're going to say, that we should maintain boundaries, keep things professional, and maybe you're right. Maybe I'm being selfish, risking Oliver's stability for something that might not even... Don't. Eleanor's voice was sharper than she intended. Don't minimize this. Whatever this is between us, don't pretend it's nothing. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the conflict in his gray eyes. Then what is it, Eleanor? Because I've been trying to figure that out for weeks. I don't know, she whispered, All I know is that when I'm with you and Oliver, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and that terrifies me. Why? Because people like me don't get fairy tale endings with people like you. Because I've seen what happens when the real world crashes into fantasy. Someone always gets hurt. And you think that someone would be Oliver. I think that someone would be me. The admission hung between them, honest and raw. Tristan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face gently in his hands. "What if you're wrong?" he said softly. "What if this isn't a fairy tale or a fantasy? What if it's just real?" Eleanor closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite every rational thought screaming at her to step away. What if he was right? And what if that was the most dangerous possibility of all? The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday, shattering Eleanor's uneasy sleep like breaking glass. She fumbled for her phone in the darkness, heart already racing with the primal fear that middle-of-the-night calls always brought. The number on the screen made her blood run cold. "David? Ellie?" Her brother's voice was weak, strained. "I'm at the hospital. Something's wrong." Eleanor was out of bed before he finished the sentence, grabbing clothes with shaking hands. "What happened? Where are you?" "Mount Sinai. The fever spiked and I started having trouble breathing. The doctors say—" His voice broke. "They say the infection is worse than they thought." Eleanor's world tilted. For 6 months, David's treatment had been progressing well. His numbers improving, his spirits high. This wasn't supposed to happen. "I'm coming. Right now. Don't do anything until I get there, okay? Ellie, you don't have to—" "I'm coming." She was throwing clothes into a bag when she remembered where she was, what she was leaving behind. Oliver, her promise to him, the job that was paying for David's treatment. Her hand stilled on her suitcase zipper. How could she choose between the two people who needed her most? A soft knock on her door interrupted her spiral of panic. "Eleanor?" Tristan's voice was concerned but careful. They'd maintained their professional distance for 3 days since the balcony conversation. "I heard you moving around. Is everything okay?" She opened the door to find him in a rumpled t-shirt and pajama pants, hair disheveled from sleep. The sight of him, solid and real and present, nearly broke her composure entirely. "It's David," she said, her voice cracking. "He's in the hospital. I have to go to him." Tristan's expression shifted immediately from sleepy concern to sharp focus. "What can I do? I don't know. I can't leave Oliver, but I can't leave David either. He's only 16 and he's scared and I'm all he has." Tears were flowing now, the careful control she'd maintained for days finally crumbling. Without hesitation, Tristan pulled her into his arms. "Hey, breathe. We'll figure this out." "There's nothing to figure out," Eleanor said against his chest, breathing in his familiar scent despite herself. "I have to go. He needs me. And Oliver needs you too." The reminder was gentle but devastating. Eleanor pulled back to look at Tristan, seeing her own conflict reflected in his gray eyes. "I know, and I'm going to hurt him no matter what I choose. If I leave, I'm breaking my promise. If I stay, my brother could—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Tristan was quiet for a moment, his hand still holding her steady. "Where is he?" "Boston. Mount Sinai. That's 3 hours by car, 4 by train." Eleanor nodded miserably. "Tristan, I'm so sorry. I know this is exactly what Victoria warned you about. Employees with messy lives and divided loyalties." "Stop." His voice was firm. "This isn't about Victoria or job performance. This is about family." He paused, studying her face. "Pack whatever you need. I'll arrange for a car. You don't understand. I might have to stay for weeks. David's alone, and if the infection, then you'll stay for weeks." Eleanor stared at him. "I can't ask you to hold my job while I'm gone indefinitely. That's not fair to you or Oliver. You're not asking, I'm offering." Tristan's hands framed her face gently. "Eleanor, your brother is sick. You think I would fire you for taking care of family? But Oliver will understand, and he'll be here when you get back. What if I don't come back?" The fear escaped before she could stop it. "What if I lose him? What if I can't bear to leave him again?" Tristan was quiet for a long moment. "Then we'll deal with that too." The simple acceptance in his voice, the lack of conditions or ultimatums, undid her completely. She collapsed against him, sobbing with exhaustion and terror, and gratitude she didn't know how to express. "I need to tell Oliver," she said when she could speak again. "At 3 a.m., let him sleep. We'll explain in the morning before you leave. He's going to think I abandoned him. He's going to think you're taking care of someone you love, just like you've been taking care of him." 2 hours later, Eleanor sat on the edge of Oliver's bed, watching him sleep in the gray pre-dawn light. His face was peaceful, one small hand curled around Mr. Peanut's. How could she explain to a 4-year-old that sometimes love meant leaving? "Oliver, sweetheart?" She touched his shoulder gently. "Can you wake up for me?" His eyes fluttered open, immediately focusing on her face with sleepy confusion. "Eleanor? Is it time for breakfast?" "Not yet, honey. I need to talk to you about something important." Oliver sat up, instantly more alert. Children were remarkably good at sensing when adult conversations were serious. "My brother David is sick," Eleanor began carefully. "He's in the hospital, and he needs me to come take care of him." Oliver's face went very still. "Are you leaving?" "For a little while. Just until he's better." "How long is a little while?" Eleanor's throat tightened. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe a few days, maybe longer. But you promised." His voice was small, hurt. "You promised you wouldn't leave." "I know I did, and I hate breaking that promise more than anything." Eleanor pulled him into her lap, feeling his small body tense with the familiar fear of abandonment. "But sometimes people we love need help, and we have to be brave and help them, even when it's hard. Like when I was sick and you stayed with me." Eleanor remembered the night 2 weeks ago when Oliver had come down with a stomach bug. She'd sat up with him all night, holding his hair back, bringing him ice chips, reading stories to distract him from feeling awful. Exactly like that. Oliver was quiet for a long moment, processing. "Is David scared?" "Very scared." "Does he have a Mr. Peanuts?" Eleanor's heart broke a little more. "No, he doesn't." Oliver considered this gravely, then climbed off her lap and retrieved something from his toy shelf. When he turned around, he was holding a small stuffed dog, a secondary comfort object she'd seen him play with occasionally. "This is Buster," Oliver said solemnly. "He's very good at making people feel better when they're sick. Maybe David could borrow him?" Eleanor accepted the small offering, tears blurring her vision. "I think David would be honored to have Buster's help." "And Eleanor?" Oliver's voice was careful, controlled, too old for his 4 years. "When David is better, you'll come back? If you and your daddy still want me to." "We want you to," Oliver said with absolute certainty. "Right, Daddy?" Eleanor turned to find Tristan standing in the doorway, fully dressed, car keys in his hand. His expression was soft as he watched their exchange. "Right," he said quietly. "We'll be waiting for you." An hour later, Eleanor stood in the penthouse foyer with her hastily packed bag, feeling like she was about to step off a cliff. Oliver clung to her, his small arms wrapped tightly around her waist. "Remember," she whispered into his hair, "I'm not disappearing. I'm just going to help David, and then I'm coming home." "To us?" "To you." Oliver pulled back to look at her seriously. "Take care of yourself too, okay? Not just David." The mature wisdom in his young voice nearly broke her. "I will." Tristan appeared beside them, gently extracting Oliver from Eleanor's arms. "The car is here," he said softly. As Eleanor headed toward the elevator, Oliver called out one last time. "Eleanor, tell David that Oliver Hale says he has to get better fast because we need you back." Eleanor turned back, memorizing the sight of them. Tristan holding Oliver, both of them watching her with love and worry and trust that she would return to them. "I'll tell him," she promised. As the elevator doors closed, Eleanor pressed Buster against her chest and prayed that some promises were stronger than distance, stronger than fear, stronger than the voice in her head that whispered this might be goodbye. Eleanor spent the first week living on hospital coffee and terror, watching machines monitor her brother's labored breathing while fighting the urge to call New York every hour. David's condition had stabilized, but barely. The infection in his bloodstream was responding slowly to aggressive antibiotics, and his doctor spoke in careful medical language that meant, "We're not sure what's going to happen." On day 6, as Eleanor dozed in the uncomfortable chair beside his bed, David's weak voice pulled her from exhausted sleep. "You look terrible." Eleanor opened her eyes to find her brother watching her with the same green eyes they shared, though his were sunken with illness and fatigue. "You should see yourself," she managed, relief flooding through her. He'd been unconscious or delirious for most of the week. "I heard you talking to someone named Oliver yesterday. And Tristan." David's voice was hoarse, but clearer than it had been in days. "Want to tell me about that?" Eleanor had been making daily calls to update Tristan on her brother's condition and to check on Oliver. She'd tried to keep the conversations brief and professional, but apparently her sleeping brother had heard more than she realized. "They're the family I work for." "Uh-huh." David studied her with the unsettling perceptiveness that illness sometimes brought. And this Tristan guy who's been calling the hospital directly to check on my treatment and somehow got me moved to a private room? Eleanor's head snapped up. What? The nurse mentioned it yesterday. Apparently someone's been handling my medical bills too. Someone with a lot of influence and deep pockets. David's weak smile held too much understanding. So either you're sleeping with a billionaire, or you found something more dangerous than money. David, you love them. It wasn't a question. Eleanor felt her carefully constructed defenses crumble under her brother's knowing gaze. It's complicated. Love usually is. David shifted painfully in his hospital bed. Tell me about Oliver. For the next hour, Eleanor found herself describing everything. Oliver's initial silence, his gradual transformation, the way he'd given up Buster without hesitation. David listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that revealed how well he understood both children and Eleanor's heart. And his father? Eleanor hesitated. He's not what I expected. When I first met him, he was this cold, distant man who seemed more machine than human. But underneath all that control, he's just a father who forgot how to love without losing everything. Sounds familiar. Eleanor looked at her brother sharply. What's that supposed to mean? You've spent the last 2 years taking care of me while keeping everyone else at arm's length, afraid that caring too much about anyone else would somehow mean abandoning me. David's voice was gentle but relentless. When was the last time you let yourself want something just for you? I want you to get better. That's not the same thing, and you know it. Eleanor's phone buzzed with an incoming call. Tristan's name appeared on the screen, and she felt that familiar flutter of anticipation and anxiety. Answer it, David said. I want to hear you talk to him. Hello? Eleanor. Tristan's voice was warm, concerned. How is he today? Better. Awake and asking uncomfortable questions. She could hear his smile through the phone. Sounds like he's definitely feeling better. How are you holding up? I'm fine. Eleanor. There was gentle reproach in his tone. You've been sleeping in a hospital chair for a week. You're not fine. The simple observation, delivered with such care, made her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. How's Oliver? She asked, deflecting. Missing you. He's been carrying that photo you took of him feeding the ducks in Central Park. Shows it to everyone who'll listen, telling them about his Eleanor. His Eleanor. The possessive made her heart ache with longing and fear in equal measure. Has he been eating? Eventually, with significant negotiation and bribery involving extra bedtime stories. Eleanor could picture it. Oliver's stubborn streak, Tristan's patient persistence, both of them navigating this new dynamic without her there to mediate. And you? How are you managing? A pause. I miss you too. The admission was quiet, honest, and completely inappropriate for an employer to say to his employee. It was also exactly what Eleanor needed to hear. Tristan, I know we agreed to maintain boundaries, but sitting here without you, watching Oliver ask every day when you're coming home, boundaries seem pretty meaningless. David was watching this conversation with growing interest, and Eleanor turned away slightly, as if privacy could contain the intensity of her feelings. Oliver asked when I was coming home? Every morning, usually followed by a detailed plan for what you'll do together when you get back. Today's plan involved teaching you how to make paper airplanes and showing you his new drawing of our family. Our family. There it was again. That dangerous word that implied belonging, permanence, a future Eleanor wasn't sure she dared to imagine. He drew our family. You're in the middle, holding both our hands. Mr. Peanuts is there too, and something that might be Buster, though it's hard to tell with Oliver's artistic style. Eleanor closed her eyes, picturing the drawing, seeing herself through a 4-year-old's eyes as the person who connected them all. I should go, she said softly. David needs his rest. Eleanor, before you hang up, I need you to know something. What? Whatever happens with David, whatever decisions you need to make about staying or coming back, I want you to choose what's right for you. Not what you think we need, not what seems most responsible, what you need. The permission to be selfish, to want something for herself, hit Eleanor like a revelation. After she hung up, David was quiet for a long moment. He loves you, he said finally. He cares about me. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like he's giving you the space to choose him freely, without pressure or manipulation. That's not just caring, Ellie. That's love. Eleanor spent that night in the hospital's family lounge, David's words echoing in her mind. When had she become so afraid of happiness? When had she decided that loving one person meant failing another? Her phone chimed with a text message, a photo from Tristan, Oliver asleep in his bed, clutching the photo of Eleanor and smiling even in sleep. The message below read, "He wanted me to send this, so you'd know he's dreaming about you coming home." Eleanor stared at the image until her vision blurred with tears. This beautiful, sensitive child who'd learned to love her enough to let her go when someone else needed her. This man who'd quietly taken care of her brother's medical expenses without expecting gratitude or leverage. This family that felt more real than anything she'd ever known. David was right. She'd been so busy protecting herself from loss that she'd forgotten how to recognize love when it was offered freely. Her phone rang again. This time it was Oliver's voice that greeted her, high and excited. "Eleanor, guess what? Daddy said I could call you myself." "Hi, sweetheart, that's wonderful. How was your day?" "Good. But I missed you. Are you taking good care of David?" "I am. He's getting stronger every day." "Good. Because I really need you to come home soon." "Why's that?" "Because Daddy doesn't know how to make pancakes the right way, and he can't do the voices for the dragon story. And yesterday he tried to help me with a puzzle, but he kept putting pieces in the wrong places." Eleanor laughed, despite her emotional exhaustion. "That sounds very frustrating." "It is. Plus he gets sad when he thinks I'm not looking. I think he misses you too." The innocent observation landed with devastating accuracy. "Oliver, yeah? I miss you both very much. And as soon as David is well enough, I'm coming home. Promise?" Eleanor looked through the lounge window toward David's room, where her brother was finally sleeping peacefully, his color better than it had been in days. She thought of the man and child 300 miles away, waiting for her return, trusting her to choose them. "I promise." For the first time in her life, Eleanor Scott was ready to choose love over fear, and pray it would be enough. Eleanor stood outside the penthouse door for a full minute, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. 2 weeks. She'd been gone for 2 weeks, and in that time everything had changed. Not in the apartment behind this door, but inside her. The woman who'd left New York had been running from love, terrified of the vulnerability it demanded. The woman returning had learned that some risks were worth taking, that some hearts were worth trusting with your own. She'd left David that morning, finally discharged and staying with their aunt in Boston until he was strong enough to return to his own apartment. His last words to her had been, "Go get your family, Ellie, and don't you dare overthink this." Now, standing here with her worn suitcase and Buster tucked safely in her purse, Eleanor realized she was about to find out if 2 weeks apart had changed anything for Tristan and Oliver, or if the magic she remembered had been nothing more than proximity and wishful thinking. She raised her hand to knock, but the door opened before her knuckles could connect. "Eleanor!" Oliver's voice was pure joy, unfiltered and bright as sunshine. He launched himself at her with the force of a small missile, wrapping his arms around her waist and holding on like she might disappear again. "Hey, sweetheart," Eleanor managed, dropping her suitcase to lift him up properly. "I missed you so much." "I missed you more," Oliver declared, pulling back to study her face with serious intensity. "You look different." "Different how?" "Happier, but also sadder." "Is that possible?" Eleanor's heart clenched at his perceptiveness. "Very possible. I'm happy to be home with you, but sad that David had to be sick." "Is he all better now?" "Much better, and he wanted me to give you this." Eleanor reached into her purse and pulled out Buster, now sporting a small bandage on one paw. "He said Buster was the bravest helper he ever had, but he's ready to come home now." Oliver accepted his stuffed dog with reverence, examining the bandage with wide eyes. "Did Buster get hurt helping David?" "Just a little scratch from being so brave. David said it makes him look distinguished. Like a hero dog?" "Exactly like a hero dog." A throat cleared softly behind them, and Eleanor looked up to see Tristan standing in the hallway, watching their reunion with an expression that made her breath catch. He looked different too, less guarded, more present. His hair was slightly mussed, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and there was something in his gray eyes that hadn't been there before she left. "Hope. Welcome home," he said quietly. The word, home, hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and promise. "Thank you," Eleanor said, meaning more than just the greeting. "Are you hungry?" Oliver asked, still in her arms. "Daddy tried to make your pancakes, but they were—" He wrinkled his nose diplomatically. "Terrible," Tristan supplied dryly. "They were terrible, Oliver. It's okay to say it. They were pretty terrible," Oliver agreed solemnly. "But he tried really hard." Eleanor laughed, the sound rusty from 2 weeks of hospital corridors and worry. "I appreciate the effort. Should we make proper pancakes for lunch?" "Can we? With blueberries in the special shapes?" Of course. That's what I came home for. As they headed to the kitchen, Eleanor caught Tristan watching her with something that might have been wonder. When Oliver ran ahead to get his dinosaur-shaped pancake cutters, Tristan touched her arm gently. How is David really? Recovering. Stubborn. Telling me I'm an idiot for overthinking everything. Eleanor met his gaze directly. He wanted me to thank you. For what? Don't play dumb. The medical bills, the private room, the specialist consultation that wasn't covered by insurance. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Tristan had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. David needed the best care available. It wasn't charity. It was family taking care of family. Family. There was that word again. But this time Eleanor didn't flinch away from it. We need to talk, she said softly. After Oliver goes to bed. Yes, Tristan agreed. We do. The afternoon passed in a blur of normalcy that felt anything but normal. Eleanor made pancakes while Oliver chattered about everything she'd missed. A butterfly that had landed on the balcony. A new book Tristan had read to him. The drawing he'd made of their family that now hung on the refrigerator next to the abandoned schedule. Tristan joined them for lunch, and Eleanor watched as father and son fell back into their easy rhythm. Oliver telling elaborate stories while Tristan listened with genuine interest, both of them more relaxed and natural than she'd ever seen them. Did you know, Oliver announced importantly, that Daddy has been sleeping on the couch? Eleanor's fork paused halfway to her mouth. The couch? Tristan looked mildly mortified. Oliver, he said your bed was too big and empty without you there, so he's been sleeping in the living room where it smells like your perfume. Oliver, Tristan said more firmly, his cheeks reddening. What? It's true. And he's been carrying your coffee mug around even when it's empty, and yesterday I found him looking at that picture of us feeding the ducks, and his eyes were all… Oliver. Tristan's voice carried a warning, but his eyes were dancing with something between embarrassment and amusement. Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest. Your eyes were all what, Oliver? Shiny. Like when I miss you really bad. The simple observation hit both adults like a physical blow. Eleanor looked at Tristan across the table, seeing him stripped of all pretense, vulnerable as a man could be in front of the woman he loved and the child who saw everything. Oliver, Tristan said quietly, why don't you go play with your dinosaurs for a while? Eleanor and I need to talk. Are you going to tell her you love her? The question dropped into the silence like a stone into still water, creating ripples that seemed to expand forever. Oliver, because you do. I can tell. And she loves you too. It's really obvious. Eleanor stared at this wise, wonderful child who saw the world with such clarity that adults spent years trying to rediscover. How do you know that? She asked gently. Because when you talk to each other on the phone, you both get the same smile. And because you came back even though you were scared to. And because love is what makes people take care of each other. And you take care of us and we take care of you. Oliver shrugged as if this was the most obvious thing in the world. That's what families do. Eleanor felt tears spill over, touched by this child's understanding of love as action, as presence, as the choice to show up even when it was frightening. Yes, she said softly, looking directly at Tristan. I do love him. Very much. Tristan's breath caught, his eyes widening with surprise and something deeper. Relief, perhaps, or recognition. And yes, Tristan said, his voice rough with emotion. I love her too, more than I thought I could love anyone again. Oliver beamed as if he'd personally orchestrated this revelation. Good. Now can we be a real family? Like, officially? Eleanor laughed through her tears. What does that mean, sweetheart? It means Eleanor gets to stay forever, and Daddy doesn't have to sleep on the couch anymore, and we can all have the same last name and maybe get a dog to keep Buster company. That's a very comprehensive plan, Tristan said solemnly, but I think Eleanor and I need to discuss the details. Okay, but hurry up, I want to show Eleanor the fort we built in my room while she was gone. And Daddy, you should probably kiss her now. That's what people do in movies when they say they love each other. With that pronouncement, Oliver skipped out of the kitchen, leaving his parents, because that's what they were now, Eleanor realized. A family in every way that mattered, staring at each other across a table scattered with the remnants of a perfect lunch. Out of the mouths of babes, Tristan said softly. Eleanor stood up slowly, her heart full to bursting. He's right, you know, about the kissing part. Tristan rose to meet her, crossing the small distance between them with the careful movements of a man handling something precious. Are you sure? He asked, his hands framing her face. Once we do this, there's no going back to professional boundaries. Eleanor smiled, covering his hands with hers. I'm counting on it. When their lips finally met, it felt like coming home and starting a new adventure all at once. Exactly the way love was supposed to feel. 3 weeks after Eleanor's return, their carefully constructed happiness shattered with a single phone call. Eleanor was in the kitchen preparing Oliver's afternoon snack when Tristan's phone rang. She watched his expression change from relaxed contentment to sharp concern as he answered. "What do you mean, emergency board meeting?" Oliver looked up from his coloring book, sensitive to the shift in atmosphere the way children always were. Eleanor moved closer to Tristan, close enough to hear Victoria Ashworth's crisp voice through the speaker. "The Hartford acquisition fell through. The investors are panicking and someone leaked photos of you playing house with the nanny. The board wants answers, Tristan. Today." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Photos. Someone had been watching them, documenting their private moments, their walks in Central Park. Tristan carrying Oliver on his shoulders while Eleanor laughed beside them, the three of them looking for all the world like an ordinary family. "What kind of photos?" Tristan's voice was carefully controlled, but Eleanor could see the tension in his shoulders. "The kind that make it look like you've lost focus on what matters. Business, Tristan. The company that bears your name and employs 12,000 people." Victoria's tone sharpened. "The board is calling for a vote of no confidence. They think you've become a liability." Tristan closed his eyes briefly. "When is the meeting?" 1 hour. "And Tristan, come alone. Don't bring your domestic complications." The line went dead. In the silence that followed, Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat, Oliver's crayon scratching against paper, the distant hum of traffic far below. Normal sounds that felt surreal in the face of what was happening. "Daddy?" Oliver's small voice cut through the tension. "Are you okay?" Tristan knelt down beside his son, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Everything's fine, buddy. Daddy just has to go to work for a while. But you promised we'd build the space station today." "We will. When I get back." Oliver studied his father's face with that unsettling perceptiveness. "Are you lying to me?" The question hit like a physical blow. Eleanor watched Tristan struggle with the choice between comforting falsehood and difficult truth. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "Some things are happening at work that might change things." "What kind of things?" Eleanor couldn't stand it anymore. She sat down at the table, pulling Oliver onto her lap. "Some people think your daddy spends too much time with us and not enough time at his office. But that's stupid," Oliver said with 4-year-old logic. "Families are supposed to spend time together." "Yes, they are," Eleanor agreed, her voice thick with emotion. "But sometimes the world makes it complicated." After Tristan left for his meeting, Eleanor tried to maintain normalcy for Oliver's sake. They colored, read stories, built elaborate block towers, but her mind was racing, imagining boardrooms full of men in expensive suits, deciding whether their love was worth Tristan's career. When Oliver napped, Eleanor found herself standing in Tristan's office, staring at the awards and patents that represented decades of brilliant work. How could she have been so naive? How could she have thought their fairy tale could exist without consequences? Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Saw the news online. You okay?" Eleanor stared at the message, realizing that their private life was now public entertainment. She Googled Tristan's name and felt sick at what she found. Headlines speculating about his mystery woman, photos of them captioned with phrases like "billionaire's midlife crisis" and "nanny seduction." The comments were worse. Hundreds of strangers dissecting her appearance, her motives, her worthiness. Gold digger, social climber, home wrecker. Even though Tristan had been widowed for years, this was the world Tristan lived in. The world she'd pulled him and Oliver into by refusing to maintain proper boundaries. When Tristan returned 3 hours later, his face was gray with exhaustion and something deeper, defeat. "How bad?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Bad." He loosened his tie, moving like a man who'd aged years in a single afternoon. "They want me to step down as CEO, take a consulting role, let someone else run the company I built." "What did you tell them?" "That I needed time to consider their proposal." Eleanor felt the walls closing in. "And if you don't step down, they'll force me out anyway." The Hartford deal was crucial, and without it, Tristan sank into a chair, running his hands through his hair. "I've lost their confidence. They think I'm distracted, unfocused. They're not entirely wrong. So you choose the company." The words came out flat, matter of fact, but they cut through the room like a blade. Tristan looked up sharply. "What?" "You choose the company. It's what you should do." What you have to do. You can't throw away everything you've built for, Eleanor gestured helplessly. For this. For us, you mean. For a fairy tale that was never sustainable anyway. Tristan stood slowly, his gray eyes searching her face. Is that what you think this is? A fairy tale? Eleanor forced herself to meet his gaze, to be strong enough to do what needed to be done. Look at the facts, Tristan. You're worth billions. I'm a nanny with a sick brother and no college degree. The world sees exactly what Victoria warned you they'd see. A gold digger who seduced her way into your life. I don't give a damn what the world sees. But you should. Eleanor's voice cracked with emotion. You have responsibilities to your company, to your employees, to Oliver's future. You can't sacrifice all of that for me. Watch me. The quiet intensity in his voice stopped her cold. You think I care more about a boardroom full of men in suits than I do about you? About Oliver? About the family we've built together? I think you're not seeing clearly because you're in love, Eleanor said desperately. But love isn't enough when the cost is everything else that matters. You're everything that matters. The simple declaration broke her heart and her resolve in equal measure. Oliver needs stability, she whispered. He needs to know his father isn't going to lose everything because he chose love over responsibility. Oliver needs to see his father fight for what matters most. They stared at each other across the space of the living room, both of them breathing hard, both of them knowing that the next few minutes would determine the rest of their lives. What if they're right? Eleanor asked. What if I am a distraction? What if loving me costs you everything? Tristan crossed the distance between them in 3 quick strides, taking her face in his hands with gentle urgency. Then let it cost me everything, he said fiercely. Do you know what my life was before you walked into it? Empty, successful, profitable, impressive, and completely empty. I had a company worth billions and a son who barely spoke to me. I had everything the world said I should want and none of what I actually needed. Tristan, no, listen to me. The night Catherine died, I promised myself I would never risk that kind of pain again. Never love someone so much that losing them would destroy me. And for 2 years I kept that promise. I built walls, maintained distance, convinced myself that success was enough. His thumbs brushed away tears she didn't realize were falling. Then you came into our lives and reminded me what it felt like to be human again. To be a father, a man, someone worth loving. You think I would trade that for a company? But your legacy, my legacy is in that little boy sleeping down the hall. My legacy is the family we've built together, the love we've chosen to fight for. Companies can be rebuilt, Eleanor. Hearts can't. Eleanor closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the certainty in his voice, the absolute conviction that what they had was worth any sacrifice. The board will never accept me, she whispered. Then we'll build something new. Together. What if we fail? Then we fail together. But Eleanor, look at me. She opened her eyes to find his face inches from hers, his expression tender and absolutely determined. We've already succeeded at the only thing that matters. We're a family. You, me, and Oliver. We're a family. Everything else is just details. The truth of his words settled into her bones, warm and certain and unshakable. I love you, she said, the admission feeling like both surrender and victory. I love you too. And tomorrow I'm going to walk into that boardroom and tell them exactly that. As Tristan pulled her into his arms, Eleanor realized that some choices weren't really choices at all. They were simply the courage to claim what had always been yours. New beginnings. 2 years later, Eleanor woke to the sound of quiet laughter drifting through the farmhouse windows, followed by the distinctive thud of a soccer ball hitting the side of the house. She smiled without opening her eyes, recognizing the voices immediately. Tristan's deep chuckle mixing with Oliver's delighted giggle and a third voice that made her heart swell with happiness. Uncle David, watch this, Oliver called out. Daddy taught me how to do a bicycle kick. Buddy, maybe warn us before you attempt advanced maneuvers, came David's amused response. At 18, her brother had grown into a thoughtful young man, whose remission was now measured in years rather than months. Some of us are still recovering from your last amazing move. Eleanor stretched lazily in the 4-poster bed, taking in the sun-dappled bedroom of their Connecticut home. The farmhouse was nothing like the sterile Manhattan penthouse. It had creaky floors, windows that stuck, and a kitchen that smelled perpetually of cinnamon and coffee. It was also the happiest place she'd ever lived. The transition hadn't been easy. True to his word, Tristan had walked into that boardroom 2 years ago and chosen love over legacy. The board had indeed forced him out, but their loss had become his freedom. Within 6 months, he'd started his own medical technology firm, taking his best innovations and most loyal employees with him. The new company was smaller, more focused, and infinitely more fulfilling. More importantly, it allowed him to work from home 3 days a week and never miss another bedtime story. "Eleanor," Oliver's voice called from outside. "Come see what Uncle David taught me." She pulled on her robe and padded to the window, looking down at the 3 most important men in her life. Oliver, now 6 and radiating confidence, was demonstrating some elaborate soccer move to an audience of his father and uncle. Tristan sat on the porch steps in jeans and a t-shirt, looking more relaxed than she'd ever imagined possible. David lounged in a lawn chair, his color healthy, his laughter frequent. "1 second, sweetheart," she called down. "Let me get dressed. Hurry, and bring Mr. Peanuts, he should see this too." Eleanor shook her head, amused. Oliver's attachment to his stuffed elephant remained strong, but now Mr. Peanuts was more adventure companion than security blanket, a sign of how much had changed. 20 minutes later, she emerged onto the porch carrying coffee for the adults and apple slices for Oliver. Tristan immediately pulled her down beside him, wrapping an arm around her waist with the casual intimacy of 2 years of mornings like this. "Good morning, Mrs. Hale," he murmured against her temple. Eleanor's wedding ring caught the morning light as she handed him his coffee. They'd married quietly 6 months ago in the farmhouse's backyard, with Oliver as ring bearer and David walking her down the makeshift aisle. It had been perfect in its simplicity. No media, no society photographers, just family and the minister who'd baptized Oliver. "Good morning, husband," she replied, loving the way the words still made him smile. "Did you see my new move?" Oliver ran over, slightly breathless but beaming. "Uncle David says I could play professionally someday." "Uncle David might be slightly biased," Eleanor laughed, ruffling his hair, "but it was very impressive. Maybe when I'm famous, I'll buy Uncle David a really good hospital so he never gets sick again." The casual comment, delivered with 6-year-old logic, made all 3 adults pause. Oliver's understanding of David's illness had evolved as he'd grown, but his protective instincts remained touchingly strong. "That's very thoughtful, buddy," David said gently, "but I'm feeling pretty good these days. Strong enough to keep up with your soccer skills anyway." "Good, because Daddy says family takes care of family, and you're definitely family." Eleanor felt that familiar tightness in her chest, the overwhelming gratitude that still caught her off guard sometimes. This life, this love, this strange and wonderful family they'd built from broken pieces and brave choices. "Speaking of family," Tristan said, his voice carrying a hint of nervous excitement, "your mom and I have something to tell you." Oliver's eyes widened with interest. "Are we getting a dog? Because I've been really good about cleaning my room and Buster would probably like a real friend." "Not a dog," Eleanor laughed. "Though we can discuss that later. Something even better." "Better than a dog?" Oliver looked skeptical. Tristan and Eleanor exchanged a glance and she nodded encouragingly. "You're going to be a big brother," Tristan said softly. The silence that followed was so complete, Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat. Oliver's face cycled through confusion, surprise, and then pure, radiant joy. "Really? Like a real baby?" "A real baby," Eleanor confirmed, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. "Next spring." Oliver threw himself at them both, wrapping his arms around their necks with the fierce enthusiasm he brought to everything he loved. "This is the best day ever," he declared. "Wait until I tell Mr. Peanuts he's going to be so excited to be a big brother elephant." David, who had been suspiciously quiet during this exchange, cleared his throat. "Congratulations, you two. Though I have to say, that kid is going to have some pretty amazing older siblings." Eleanor looked at her brother, then at Oliver, then at Tristan, feeling almost dizzy with happiness. "Yes," she agreed softly. "They really are." Later that afternoon, as Oliver napped and David drove into town for groceries, Eleanor and Tristan sat on the porch swing, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. "Do you ever regret it?" Eleanor asked, the question that sometimes surfaced in quiet moments like this. "Walking away from everything you'd built?" Tristan was quiet for a moment, his hand finding hers and linking their fingers together. "I used to think success meant building something so big and important that it would outlast me," he said finally. "Something that would prove I mattered, that my life had significance. And now I know that success is this, sitting on a porch with the woman I love, listening to our son play in the yard, knowing that your brother is healthy and happy, carrying our second child." He turned to look at her, his gray eyes warm with contentment. "This is my legacy, Eleanor. This love, this family, This life we've chosen together. Everything else was just noise. Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of honeysuckle and home, listening to the distant sound of Oliver's laughter as he played with the neighborhood children who'd become his closest friends. The board was wrong about one thing, she said softly. What's that? You didn't lose focus on what mattered. You found it. As evening painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Oliver appeared at the porch steps, grass-stained and grinning, Mr. Peanuts tucked under one arm. Can we have pancakes for dinner? He asked hopefully. To celebrate the baby? Eleanor and Tristan looked at each other and laughed. The same laugh that had started it all. The same joy that had carried them through every challenge and triumph. Pancakes it is, Eleanor said, standing to follow her son into the house. With extra blueberries. And funny shapes, Oliver added, racing ahead to wash his hands. Tristan caught Eleanor's hand before she could follow, pulling her back for a soft kiss that tasted like promises and forever. Thank you, he whispered against her lips. For what? For teaching me that the bravest thing isn't protecting your heart. It's giving it away. As they walked hand in hand into their warm, imperfect, absolutely perfect home, Eleanor Scott Hale knew that some stories didn't end. They just became the beginning of something even more beautiful. What did this story teach you about love, courage, and the choices that shape our lives? Your participation in our channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.